Hi, Arthur Malishevsky here, and welcome to Introduction to Orthotic Prescription by Footwork Podiatric Laboratory. What we are going to be talking about in this presentation is how to get the most out of your orthotic prescription when dealing with footwork. So let's begin. What makes footwork different from the others? Basically, it's the ability to give the podiatrist what they require, and that is done through a variety of techniques and materials. What we're talking about techniques is when we're talking about modified root, Blake inverted, wedges, cord orthotics, we pretty much do everything. And materials, we utilize polypropylene, we also utilize carbon fiber, different types of EVA. And when we're talking about polypropylene, because we machine these days, we can machine the polypropylene in 0.5 mm increments ranging from pretty much 1 mm up to 6. Understanding what the podiatrist needs. Here at Footwork, we have full-time podiatrists working on the design process. So your prescription is actually assessed by a podiatrist, by a practicing podiatrist. So if there's any issues on the prescription form, we'll be able to pick it up, give you a call, and make sure that you get what you want. Producing what the podiatrist needs. This comes down to the ability to machine the shapes that you require. One thing is to ask for a certain shape, but then the other one is to actually produce that shape. And that is through the machining centers that we use, the software that we have, as well as the materials that we use. Polypropylene, for example, comes in thicknesses of 30, 35, 40, and now 50 millimeters. Most labs don't use polypropylene higher than 35 millimeters. So if you require an arch that is higher than that, you will not receive it. With us, we have polypropylene going up to 50 millimeters thick, which means we can generate an arch height on an orthotic shell or a medial flange or a medial flare that is well above 35 millimeters. Technical support, once again, we have full-time podiatrists here, so if you have a question about the prescription form or you'd like to discuss a case, you can ring us up and get some help. Finish of the product, our staff care about what they do, they are proud of what they do, and when you receive a pair of orthotics that you've charged your patient hundreds of dollars for, when you open up the bag, you don't want it to look like something that a 5-year-old has produced in a kindergarten with glue hanging off it and the covers being uneven, etc. The product's got to look like something what they're paying for. Turnaround time, we have a turnaround time, a standard turnaround time of 5 working days. That is 5 working days from when we received your cast or your scan. So if we received your cast on a Monday, you should receive your orthotics back the following Monday. We can also produce orthotics the same day. However, we do require notice in advance so we know that it's coming. It is a very difficult job to do that, but we have made orthotics and deliver them within 3 to 4 hours in Melbourne metro area. 24-hour turnaround we do on a regular basis, but then again, we do need to get notified and maybe ring us first so we can have a chat about it. So let's begin. Foot orthotic prescription. Keep it simple. What we find is a lot of podiatrists overcomplicate the prescriptions. What we need to know from you is where the force or the pressure is to be applied. And number 2, how much of that force or pressure is required. We have 3 basic arch fill techniques that we utilize, which are inverted, mid, and modified root. The most common arch fill technique is our mid. In this instance, the highest point is at the talonavicular region. It allows the pronation of the mid-tarsal joint. It is commonly used for a neutral foot type, and the correction range is from 0 to 12 degrees. How we arrive at the correction range is predetermined. We'll cover right at the end. In here, we can see the shape of the mid-arch fill technique. So the highest point is at the talonavicular region or the proximal third of the arch. From there, the shape drops away in a straight line to the first MTPJ, thus allowing for the pronation of the mid-tarsal joint and the plantar flexion of the first ray. Our modified root arch fill technique is more of a supportive device. The highest point is more towards the midfoot or mid to forefoot. It supports the mid to forefoot. Please note it does not allow first ray function. It is there to support the distal part of the forefoot. And the correction range is from 0 to 8 degrees. As you can see here in this picture, the arch height is more distal, more pressure being exerted into mid and forefoot. Mid-modified root is a combination that is being used quite commonly these days with podiatrists that require more archier orthotic than a mid, but not something that puts so much pressure in their rear foot. A lot of the patients are finding that with a mid device, they don't feel like they're getting any arch support. The pressure is more too much is too much into the rear foot. So a mid-modified root is a good compromise or a good combination to use in a case where you want more arch support but you still require first ray function. It also gives you less calc inclination angle support. It gives you less pressure on the medial side of the calcaneus, which can also be utilized with cases of plantar fasciitis or mid-calcaneal spur syndrome. It does allow first ray function, and the correction range is somewhere in the range of 0 to 8, maybe up to 10 degrees. In this picture we can see it is more like a mid, however the high point, rather than being under talanavicular region, it is slightly more distal, and then it still works its way pretty much straight down to the first MCPJ. So here we have an example of a mid. This is an example of a mid-modified root. As you can see the difference, mid-modified root, the high point it moves slightly more distally, and the pressure moves away slightly from the mid-calc tubercle area. And this is an example of a modified root. The last one is an inverted orthotic or a Blake inverted device. Now this shape works a little bit differently. It is a pure rear foot controlling device. The plaster fill goes pretty much to the distal end of the calcaneus, and the correction range is anywhere from 15 to 25 degrees. This is an example of an inverted device at 0 degrees. So the highest point is at the interior edge of the calcaneus. This is an example of an inverted device of 15 degrees. And this is an example of an inverted device of 20 degrees. So the correction range, or the amount of correction, is being purely determined by the amount of degrees of inversion. This is another view of a 20 degree inverted device. There is no or very minimal pressure on the arch. In this table we demonstrate how the different correction ranges work in the different arch fill techniques. We have mild, moderate, aggressive, and oh my god. So a modified root mild correction is 0 to 6 or 8 degrees. A mid would go from 0 to 2 degrees up to a maximum of about 12, and an inverted orthotic would go from 15 degrees as a minimum up to 25 to 30. Very seldomly do we utilize, or podiatrists utilize, correction ranges above 25 degrees because it is an extraordinary amount of inversion. So a patient comes to you, you work out which arch fill technique you want, whether it's a modified root, mid or inverted, depending on the foot mechanics. And then you work out on a scale of 1 to 10 how much correction you want. So for example, you have a middle-aged gentleman coming to you with a neutral foot type, complaining of heel pain in the mornings after playing a round of golf with his buddies. He gets up on Monday morning and he's got heel pain. Presents to you a week later in the practice saying it's heel pain when he first wakes up in the morning. Look at his foot type, it's a fairly neutral foot type. Would you use a modified root? No, you wouldn't, because you want first ray function. Would you use an inverted? No, you wouldn't, because it's a neutral foot type. So you're left with a mid. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much correction do you want? Let's say 4 or 5. This is the range that you would actually ask for, around 4 or 5 degrees. Second case, a mother brings a 10-year-old boy who's got hypermobile flat feet, complaining of arch pain, complaining of fatigue when playing sports. Again, do you use a modified root? No, because you want first ray function. Would you use a mid? No, because the orthotic would actually feel like a basketball inside his shoe and create too much arch pressure. You want a rear foot corrective device, so you'd use an inverted. On a scale of 1 to 10, you'd probably want about an 8 or a 9. So your correction range would be somewhere around the 25 degree mark. Your third case, an elderly lady presents to you with pain on the second MTPJ. She's about 75 years old. She's got a HIV, she's got a forefoot supinatus or varus. First ray is dysfunctional. Would you use a mid? No, because you want to support the forefoot. Would you use inverted? Definitely not. You would use a modified root because you want to support the forefoot. On a correction range, on a scale of 1 to 10, you don't want too much correction because you don't want to overcorrect her. She probably would not tolerate it. You want somewhere around a 3 or a 4, so would use mild to moderate. Under the arch fill technique, you'll find an option for minimum and maximum arch fill. Minimum arch fill, maximum arch fill. The standard arch heights on our devices for a mid-modified root or a mid-modified root is 90% of the arch height when the rear foot is at 0, and how we work out the rear foot at 0 we'll show you in the next section. So this is basically a mid-arch fill technique with 90% arch height. Standard arch height, as already mentioned, is 90% of the height of the arch. Minimum arch fill will give you 100%, or roughly 3 to 4 millimeters higher than the standard arch shape. So this is an example of a minimum arch fill. The highest point is brought up to full contact with the arch. and a maximum arch fill is 80% or 3 to 4 millimeters lower than the standard arch height. As you can see there, it is much lower at the highest point. In cast correction section, this is where we apply the amount of correction that you want to your orthotic via refoot and then forefoot correction. But before we do that, you need to understand how we actually assess your cast and where we derive the correction from. So, all scans are balanced to refoot 0 and all measurements are taken from refoot 0. What do we mean by that? Well, basically you can have a cast that is slightly pronated, or more than slightly pronated in this case. You can have a cast that is slightly supinated. What we used to do in the past is take the cast, pour it with plaster, then balance it out to refoot 0, and then add the correction that you've requested, whether it's 2, 3, 4, or 20 degrees. So all correction is taken from refoot 0 as shown on this slide. These days, the same cast is scanned looking from the refoot. It is then balanced, showing you how much forefoot supinatus or varus it had, and then the arch fill technique is then added once the cast is at refoot 0. This arrow here shows us approximately 90% of the height of the cast or the arch when the refoot is at 0. One thing to consider is that we give you 90% of the height of the arch, whether it's a mid-modified root or a modified root orthotic. Then when you add refoot correction to it, the arch height will increase by approximately 0.5 millimeter for every degree of correction, meaning that if you have a prescription of 0 degrees on the left foot and 4 degrees on the right foot will not only have 4 degrees of refoot correction, but it will also be 2 millimeters higher in the arch than the left foot. Forefoot correction is added in this section. Now, forefoot correction can be both varus or valgus, varus being plus or on the medial side, and valgus being minus or on the lateral side. Valgus forefoot correction is basically a lateral wedge to the orthotic shell. In this picture, we see how the lateral column is being followed with the plaster work, and now we've raised it, creating a forefoot valgus post of about 4 degrees. Under the varus section, we apply more pressure to the medial distal end of the orthotic. Again, in a mid-arch fill technique, the distal portion follows the first ray. By adding a 4 degree forefoot varus post, we're putting more pressure on the first ray, thus supporting a forefoot varus or a supinatus or a dysfunctional first ray. And this is an example of an actual positive mold and what it would look like. These changes were made intrinsically in virtual plaster work, and they're reflected in the shape of the orthotic shell. An extrinsic post can also be added to the forefoot. This is asked by simply writing extrinsic under the correction box. Here we have examples of extrinsic forefoot posts, valgus in the top left and varus in the bottom right. One thing to remember is that a forefoot extrinsic post will change the amount of refoot correction. Not very significantly, and the orthotic may rock slightly because the refoot and the forefoot are no longer aligned. But let's face it, when the patient is about 70-80 kilos or plus and they stand on that, it pretty much is insignificant. So to tie up forefoot posting, the main difference between intrinsic and extrinsic forefoot correction is that the intrinsic is down to the plaster work, whereas extrinsic is down to the shell after it has been molded, vacuum pressed or ground out. Generally speaking, most podiatrists will ask for extrinsic posting as an afterthought, where they need to change the shape of the orthotic when the patient comes back for a review. An intrinsic post will last much longer. Some podiatrists may think that it's more difficult to modify or easier to modify an extrinsic post, but that is not true. An intrinsic post can still be ground down and adjusted. So we've covered the orthotic arch shape and the correction amount, which gives you 90% of the orthotic prescription or the shape of the orthotic that you want to generate. In orthotic type, we will determine the shape of the heel cup. We have 4 orthotic types: traditional, concave wedge, wedge, and chord. And chord is then broken down into chord hook and chord full heel. The traditional orthotic type is a traditional heel cup of approximately 12 to 14 millimeters, depending on the size of the foot. The heel cup provides natural heel padding. It is bulkier when compared to the other devices. It's even extra bulkier with different top covers such as Spanker or Lunasoft, where the thickness of the cover has to be accommodated inside the heel cup. And the heel cup provides a pronatory force on the lateral side of the device. A concave wedge is a very low bulk heel cup. We still have a heel cup on the medial side of the device, however there's no lateral or posterior heel cup on that orthotic. It reduces shoe fit problems. It does not reduce any amount of correction that you will want to generate. A wedge device is similar to a concave wedge, however it has a much flatter heel, thus giving you more force on the rear foot. But with more force on the rear foot, we do put more pressure, and is advice that you might want to consider when dealing with a patient with heel pain. The cord device can be broken down into cord hook and cord full heel. A cord hook has the lateral part of the orthotic shell cut away. It is mainly used with shoes of heel heights of 2 inches and higher, whereas a cord full heel is a very low bulk concave wedge device. In a normal orthotic, we give you 4 mm of heel expansion and make the width of the device in the forefoot slightly wider to accommodate the anatomical shape of the foot. In a low profile option, which will be covered later on, we give you 3 mm of heel expansion and then cut the orthotic straight into the forefoot, thus giving you a narrow device. With a full heel orthotic option, we give you no heel expansion and cut the orthotic straight, thus giving you a very narrow device which you can fit into dress shoes. Please note, the orthotic is cut to the shape of the cast, not to the shape of a shoe. So if you have a cast that is very narrow, the orthotic will be extremely narrow and might slide around inside the shoe. Medial heel skive is a modification of the rear foot which gives you more rear foot control without affecting the arch height. It is done to the medial third of the calcaneus on a frontal plane. Usually it is asked in millimeters, 2, 4 and 6. However, on our prescription form now, we have gone to the option of doing small, medium and large. When doing modifications in millimeters to a cast, it is very subjective to the shape and size of the foot. What we found in the past, a lot of podiatrists were asking for 4 mm medial heel skives, regardless whether the foot is a child size 2 or an adult size 15. 4 mm on a child size 2 is a huge modification, whereas 4 mm on adult size 15 is actually a small medial heel skive. So we've decided to go to small, medium and large, and we will determine the amount of skive or shave that you require according to the foot size of the patient. Triplanar heel shave is a modification where we apply extra rear foot correction to the calcaneus. But unlike medial heel skive, which is purely frontal plane correction, a triplanar heel shave is applied more distally to the calcaneus, thus giving you more triplanar correction. It is usually utilized with a higher arch foot type where a higher calc inclination angle is required. No plaster fill between 1 and 5 is an inbuilt med dome into the orthotic shell itself. The difference between a no plaster fill between 1 and 5 and an extrinsic med dome is that this modification is much lower bulk. It is usually used in dress shoes where a thick extrinsic med dome may not be able to be accommodated. Cuboid notch is a cut into the cast around the calc cuboid joint. It is designed to give you more lateral pressure to the orthotic, thus adding lateral stability. It is designed to lock the foot up in the transition stage from heel lift into propulsion, thus creating a rigid lever and aiding in the generation of the windlass mechanism. Plantar fifth ray grind is an increase in the lateral column or the lateral arch height of the orthotic. Here you see in normal plaster work, we follow the natural contour of the lateral arch, whereas with a plantar fifth ray grind, we increase that arch height by approximately 3 mm. Plantar fascial accommodation. As the name suggests, this modification is there to accommodate the medial slip of the plantar fascia so it doesn't get irritated. It also has a secondary function in the way we produce our devices today by machining. By putting a plantar fascial accommodation into your device made out of polypropylene or carbon fiber, we are actually stiffening up that shell by approximately 0.5 mm. First ray accommodation is a modification in the plaster work where we promote first ray function. We do this by adding more plaster to the medial distal end of the forefoot, thus allowing the first ray to drop. It also has a first ray cutout like you would normally see with a first ray cutout on a shell, but in this instance we bring the forefoot post slightly more proximal, thus allowing the shell to be balanced on the distal end. And unlike with a first ray cutout, the shell doesn't rock. So the main difference between a first ray accommodation and a first ray cutout is that you get lowering of the shell from the medial cuneiform joint, thus allowing the first metatarsal to drop, and then the shell is balanced. Extra heel expansion. The operative word in this modification is extra. We give you 4 mm of heel expansion to begin with. When you ask for extra heel expansion, that is on top of that 4 mm. So if you ask for 4 millimeters extra heel expansion, you will end up with 8 millimeters, thus making the orthotic very wide. Please be aware of that. Medial flare is a widening of the shell around the arch area or beginning at the talanavicular region. A medial flare is usually used when you're concerned about medial bulging or overhang, which might create blistering or callus formation once the patient's been wearing the orthotic. A medial wrap is an extension of a high medial heel cup into the arch. Some people also call it a medial flange. Other is anything else that you might want to consider, such as a sweet spot, which can be applied to any part of the foot. In this instance, we see a sweet spot under the mid-calc tubercle area to offload the pressure in that painful region. It can also be used if the patient has got scar tissue or a nodule in the plantar fascia. Simply mark the area on the cast and make a note of this on the form. Heel aperture in this section is simply there to drop the orthotic lower inside the shoe. We have 3 sizes, small, medium and large, and the size is determined by the size of the heel seat in the orthotic shell. What we have here is an example of a medium heel aperture. A larger one would pretty much take most of the space of the heel seat, and a smaller one would be again smaller than what is indicated here. Please note that the more rear-foot correction you ask on your orthotic, the more lateral the heel aperture will be. So much so that we don't put heel apertures in devices of 10 degrees or more. This is simply because the aperture would be so far lateral, it would be useless, it would be very small, as well as the device would be subject to fracture on the lateral side. A pour-on button is used for more cushioning in the device, whereas a camber button is there to protect the pour-on from wearing out. A first tray cutout, as the name indicates, is a cut on the medial distal part of the shell. Unlike a first tray accommodation, this is simply a cutaway of the shell. Lateral plantar grind is a grind on the lateral aspect of the shell. This is usually used to make the shell thinner, more flexible, as well as more accommodative in a higher heel shoe. A GAIT plate is an extension on the lateral aspect of the shell. A lateral GAIT plate is usually used with kids with intoeing. Shell shape, standard or low profile. In a standard shell shape, you get 4 millimeters of heel expansion, and the forefoot is then made slightly wider to accommodate the natural shape of the foot. In a low profile, we give you 3 millimeters of heel expansion and cut the shell straight. If the shell has a heel cup, i.e. a traditional orthotic, the heel cup will be slightly lower and it will be tapered in a little bit more on the medial, lateral and posterior aspect to fit it easier into shoes. Heel stabilizer. We have 3 options: full, half and mini. A full heel stabilizer, a half heel stabilizer option. This can also be used on the lateral side, or a mini stabilizer. Please note, a half and a mini option is only available in a machined post. At footwork, you can also ask for an EVA heel stabilizer. However, this can only be when the heel stabilizer is full. We have 3 different shell materials at footwork. Polypropylene is the most commonly used. With polypropylene, you have a range of 2 to 6 millimeters with 0.5 millimeter increments. The type of carbon fiber used at footwork is Superform. It is a compound of carbon fiber and polypropylene and is available in semi-rigid and semi-flex. EVA, we have 3 different types: soft, medium and hard. When asking for combination, the firmer type of EVA will always go on the bottom, with the top part being softer. When asking for EVA, please also indicate the length of device that you would like, whether it being a 3/4 shell, a web length which goes up to the sulcus, or a full length EVA device. The cover options at footwork are no cover polished, no cover rough, standard plus, web and full. A no cover polished option gives you a shell that has no top cover with a nice clean finish. A no cover rough option gives you a shell that has no top cover, but the top surface is roughed up, ready for you to apply your own top cover. Standard cover is a shell length cover of either vinyl, leather, pierce flies. Standard plus is a shell length cover with a layer of pour-on or PPT underneath the top cover. Web, as the name suggests, the top cover extends into the web space or the sulcus. A full length cover, the top cover extends to the full length of the shoe. So cover material options include vinyl, leather, pierce flies, Lunar Soft, Cushioning options are Pour-On 1.5 3mm or 3mm red, which is slow release Pour-On. You can also utilize Spanko as a top cover with its cushioning properties, Spanko of 1.5 and 3mm. Quite often podiatrists will request Pour-On as a base with a Spanko top cover. Cambro base is used in a web length or a full length cover to protect the Pour-On. Other or comments in this section, you would ask for extrinsic padding to be applied to your orthotics or anything else more specific that you would like. Padding. At footwork, we make all our own pads except for a med dome. A med dome is generally placed at the distal edge of the orthotic shell. If you have a standard or standard plus cover, the med dome will finish before the distal edge of the shell and be sandwiched within the top cover. However, if you have a web or a full length cover, the med dome will extend slightly past the distal edge of the shell. If you would like the med dome to be positioned anywhere else, please indicate on the cast or provide a template with a drawing. A PMP is a pad where the full thickness of the pad is under med heads 2, 3 and 4. A plantar cover is a pad that has full thickness under med heads, extending to the full width of the cover. In this instance, we have an example of a plantar cover with a first ray cutout. You can have a fifth ray cutout or a U under med heads 4, 3 or 2. If it's something more specific, again, please supply a template or indicate on the cast. Plantar cover 2 to 5 is more of a functional pad, also known as a 4-foot valgus pad or a reverse Morton's extension. Moiety pad. A moiety pad is a more aggressive version of a plantar cover 2 to 5. It begins at the CUBOID joint and extends past the med heads on the lateral side. It is beveled in a valgus fashion, thus providing valgus wedging from the CUBOID joint past the med heads. All pads at footwork will be made from 3mm Pour-On unless otherwise indicated. Padding such as plantar cover 2 to 5 and moiety pads are generally asked for in 3mm green EVA. Our standard turnaround date is 5 working days. That is 5 working days from when we receive your casts with a fully filled out prescription form. We do have a rapid return option where we can manufacture your devices between 24 to 48 hours, but a rapid return will be anything under 5 working days. When asking for a rapid return, please indicate a time, as this will also affect our production capacity.